Goodbye, goodbye, we're leaving you, skippity-doo. Goodbye, we wish you fun, goodbye. Goodbye.
So you want to know how to be a successful ex-Prime Minister. You've just lost your home and your job. And your best bet is to learn from those who've gone before you. How do you deal with losing the most potent political drug of all? Power. And where will you live? And what will you do for money?
I get him to play Terminator 4. I mean, anything is available.
Now, that is definitely the best offer I've had. Actually, the sad thing is it's the only offer I've had.
Goodbye, goodbye, we're leaving you, skippity-doo. Goodbye, we wish you fun, goodbye. Goodbye, goodbye, goodbye.
Tony Blair is joining the most exclusive political club in Britain. At the age of 54, he's the youngest member of the ex-Prime Minister's Club.
How are you? Yes, of course. Lovely.
As a member, you face the most difficult of tasks, how to find fulfillment in life after number 10. It isn't always easy for someone who used to be the most powerful politician in the land to maintain your dignity and sense of self-worth and make money.
You look very fit. That colour suits you. Thank you very much. Blue suits me also. Yeah, it does. If you have white hair, yes, I can.
Well, an ex-Prime Minister is a rather unusual fish in politics. If they say nothing, what are they doing there? If they say something, there's every chance it will be construed as an oblique attack on your successor or whatever it may be. So it is extremely difficult to have a role that isn't capable of severe misinterpretation.
I've been covering politics for over 40 years. I've counted them in and I've counted them out. I've been lucky enough to interview all the last 8 Prime Ministers, from Harold Macmillan to Tony Blair. And I've been here on the day, the traumatic day, when they've had to give it all up.
Michael Cockerell is down at Downing Street brushing the hair out of his eyes. Michael, good morning again.
Good morning, David.
What's going on there?
Well, I suppose here is really the democratic equivalent of the tanks on the street that you see in a totalitarian country. There are the Black Rovers here, and there may be the John Lewis moving vans that there were in 1970, although when I talked to Mr. Callaghan about that, he thought that this was a very undignified way of doing things.
Jim Callaghan was Labour's last Prime Minister before Tony Blair to leave number 10, when he lost the general election.
My father was extremely disappointed. This is a brutal transition. One moment you are literally in the morning, you are in number 10, surrounded by private secretaries and scrambled telephone systems and all the paraphernalia of the office, and then everyone politely waves you goodbye, and you're on your own.
How did it feel, sir?
How did you feel, sir?
How was the first outing?
Very nice indeed.
Harold Macmillan was the first Prime Minister I filmed. In October 1963, he went into hospital for a prostate operation.
The Prime Minister has had his prostate gland removed. There were no complications.
Wrongly believing he had cancer, Macmillan had decided to resign as Prime Minister in his hospital bedroom. Uniquely, the Queen came to the hospital to receive his resignation. Macmillan received a blunt reminder he was no longer Her Majesty's First Minister.
There was a telephone, scrambler telephone by my bed, and I got to sleep about in the afternoon after this ordeal. I heard a fellow knocking about in the room, and I said, "What are you doing?" He says, "The post office man come to take away your telephone. You're not entitled to a telephone." I said, "To hell, I was Prime Minister 2 hours ago. You might leave it a bit." "No," he said, "that's the rule." So that was the end of my power, which has never been restored.
I think that was when the sort of wonderful irony of it dawned on Grandpapa. He became aware that, you know, it had all gone. The trappings of office had vanished instantly. And for him, as a classical scholar, there was something splendidly kind of the Greek tragedy of the people who rise high have further to fall.
11 years later, I filmed Ted Heath as he became the ex-Conservative Prime Minister following his shock general election defeat in '74. And years later, I talked to him about it.
Well, I was bitterly disappointed. I wanted to continue, but it wasn't possible. We got more votes than the Labour Party did, but we got fewer seats. It was a bit of disappointment to us. And we then went into opposition.
The removal of Ted Heath's grand piano from number 10 symbolised the end of the musical Prime Minister. And he faced further graphic evidence of how abruptly the trappings of power are removed on the day you become an ex.
We do handle these things in Britain in a very brutal way. When Ted Heath went to Buckingham Palace to resign in 1974, he went in the official car. When he came to go out again, there was no car for him.
We walked out to get in the car. Where's the car? Car had gone up to pick up Mr. Wilson to bring him to Buckingham Palace. Seemed to me rather an odd way to perform. And so we were then told that a pool car was arriving, and I remember from a Jaguar moved down into a rather dilapidated Morris Oxford and drove out of Buckingham Palace in that.
We've just heard from our staff at Westminster that the Prime Minister, Mr. Harold Wilson, has resigned. He feels he has been leader of the Labour Party for long enough.
No, I'm not happy to go. It's a sad moment in many ways. But you do feel a certain relief at the burden falling off your shoulder. As I say, a 7-day-a-week burden. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Harold Wilson had astonished the country by suddenly resigning just 2 years after he'd been returned to power for his second period as Prime Minister.
I watched him go out the door, and he looked almost smaller as he walked out.
You're having a busy day, aren't you?
Not too busy, sir. How about your day? Are you very busy?
Not too busy, like you said.
I think he was sadder from then on, because Wilson's problem was his life had been entirely politics, and much of it inside number 10. I think when he walked out of number 10, he left his real self and real life behind there, and he didn't have anything to replace it. And he didn't really have much money. And he was probably the last of our prime ministers who was seriously financially deprived, because the pension was small. He did shrewdly arrange to have a car, because what he cleverly did when Ted Heath left as leader of the Conservative Party, having been Prime Minister in '75, Harold generously arranged that Ted Heath should have a chauffeured car as an ex-Prime Minister. So when he retired next year, he had a chauffeured car as the next Prime Minister.
Former Prime Ministers are much better off these days. As well as the car, Tony Blair will get an immediate prime ministerial pension of £64,000 a year, as well as a further £83,000 to run his office. And that's on top of what he earns as an MP. And he will get round-the-clock protection from special branch officers 24 hours a day.
Tony Blair will get security, and that will be assessed from time to time, but he'll probably get it for most, if not all, the rest of his life. It's a very mixed blessing. It's one thing to have a car. It's another thing to have a car which is where you can't open the windows, where you are driven by a police officer, and where your protection squad really expects to know what you're going to do all the time.
How you'll fare as an ex-Prime Minister will be affected by the circumstances in which you leave. If you can, you should try to depart with your head held high.
We're leaving Downing Street for the last time after 11.5 wonderful years. Now it's time for a new chapter to open, and I wish John Major all the luck in the world.
But it's never easy if it's your own cabinet colleagues who forced you from office. So what was it like for her when the game was up?
Traumatic. But I think, I mean, we're not talking about like, Tony Blair's going is not exactly the same. even though I think he is being pushed out, really, because of a combination of Iraq and pressure from Brown. But Mrs. Thatcher had been stabbed in the back by her own party, not, as she pointed out, defeated on the floor of the House of Commons or in an election. And I think that rankled more than anything else.
Blair's made a terrible mistake, staying on for too long and lingering about and messing about over his handout transition to his successor, but at least the dates of his own choosing, he's always known when he's going to go, so there isn't the overnight shock effect, whereas, one problem with Margaret is I don't think she knew quite what had hit her.
What hurt most of all, said Margaret Thatcher, was that her cabinet colleagues had conspired to force her to resign. One by one, they'd come to see her oozing false sympathy. It was, she declared, treachery with a smile on its face.
It has been an immense privilege to serve as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom over the last 6.5 years. When the curtain falls, it's time to get off the stage, and that is what I propose to do. I have an appointment with Her Majesty the Queen in a few moments to tender my resignation. After that, I hope that Norma and I will be able, with the children, to get to the Oval in time for lunch and for some cricket this afternoon.
You having a nice day, sir? Always do at the Oval.
Thanks.
Well, the Oval was my spiritual home. Whenever I went there, it was a place of solace. Cares fell away, everything else fell away. So it seemed a good place to be that day.
It does seem an unusual thing to do, the day you stop being Prime Minister, to go off to the Oval.
I don't think it's unusual at all. I think it's very desirable. I recommend it to my successors in the future.
When you leave your two tied cottages of number 10 and Chequers, you'll need to have a home to move into. You may have had the foresight to buy an upmarket house in West London, but will the builders have it ready in time? This wasn't a problem for Prime Ministers from an earlier age who tended to own aristocratic estates. But many of your post-war predecessors have had their housing problems.
My grandfather was effectively bankrupt by the end of the war, and he was forced to put Chartwell on the market. This outraged Lord Camrose, the then proprietor of the Daily Telegraph, who corralled 10 wealthy well-wishers, and they each ponied up the princely sum of £5,000. So for £55,000, which in 1946 was a lot of money, they bought Chartwell on the understanding that my grandparents would live there till the end of their days, and then it would be presented to the nation.
When the carpenter's son from Broadstairs, Ted Heath, left office following his surprise 1974 election defeat, he was literally homeless. The bachelor Prime Minister had never owned a house of his own and had been expecting to stay on in number 10 Downing Street.
He wasn't the sort of man who thought about those domestic details very much. So he really had made no provision for himself. He literally had nowhere to go.
Tim Kitson, who was Heath's parliamentary secretary, volunteered to give up his own London flat for the ex-Prime Minister to use until he found a place of his own.
Tim Kitson said to me, we better get the flat ready for Mr. Heath. So he and I went round and literally we got out hoovers and brushes and dusters and so on. And this was about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, I remember, Tim and I mopping round to get it ready for him to go there the next day.
Margaret Thatcher did have a place to go when she lost office. She and DT, as she called her husband, had bought a new house in a gated community in Dulwich, South London.
Mrs. Thatcher? Are you looking forward to your new home, Mrs. Thatcher?
Their new home was conveniently close to Dulwich Golf Course and not far from the boys' public school.
You must be cold and wanting to get away. Very good parts in the village.
Dennis said to me, and I always thought it astonishing, It would be very nice for Margaret Thatcher to walk around the playing fields of Dulwich College and watch the boys playing football. This always seemed to me a very, very unlikely thing to happen. And indeed, Dennis didn't like the golf course.
It'll do. Done what was required of it. Sounded good. Bit off the line, but, well, all right.
So both of them made miscalculations about what the others would like. One of the things that she hadn't taken into account was that in order to get to Dulwich, you had to go through Brixton. And she didn't like driving through Brixton for all sorts of reasons. She found it depressing and she found it even threatening. So she really didn't spend very much time there.
I spent most of my youth in Brixton until well into my 30s at different houses. But it's a very vivid area. There is an innate friendliness in the area that those people who live there understand very well.
Nice to see you. How do you do?
You used to come to my shop and had a shop recorded. The record shop used to come to.
Yeah.
John Major didn't choose to live in Brixton as an ex-Prime Minister, but he was to buy a luxury flat not far away. On the day he left Number 10, he went back to his constituency home in rural Huntingdon. He faced problems common to all ex-Prime Ministers: how to adjust to the loss of power and the life support system provided by Number 10. He vividly recalls the morning after, the day he stopped being Prime Minister.
Well, I woke up the next morning and instinctively you wake, and there's that brief moment when your eyes and your brain are awake, but they're not fully functioning, just a millisecond. And I woke up, and then I realized that I didn't have to go and finish boxes. I didn't have to go straight away and summon private secretaries and make decisions. And I realized there's a certain element of relief in that. Of course, you miss what you were doing, but there's a certain element of relief in it. And I remember rather later, about a month or so later, I turned over in bed one morning, switched on the radio to find that the Prime Minister was going off to a European summit. And I turned the radio off and went back to sleep.
I think when you stop being Prime Minister, it's a very disorienting experience, because you go in such a short period of time from having everything arranged for you to being on your own. There's nobody there to remind you how to telephone.
What's around the corner, Lady Thatcher?
Code numbers have probably changed since you came in. You don't have an up-to-date telephone book of your own, because, of course, Number 10 had all your telephone numbers. I remember being rung up by Margaret Thatcher a week or two after she left Number 10 and being told on a Sunday she had a plumbing problem. And I said, oh dear, you better get a plumber in. Long silence. How do I do that? Well, I tried the Yellow Pages. And that's the way we had to go. I ended up ringing the plumber in the Yellow Pages.
As a former merchant sailor, Jim Callaghan was a much more practical man when he left Number 10. He was also looking forward to spending more time with his sheep on the farm he owned near the Sussex Downs.
I remember we all drove down to the farm in Sussex, and pretty soon that new rhythm of life in which the scrambled phones were taken out and the private secretaries weren't any longer hovering on the doorstep, as it were, became the natural rhythm.
42. You enjoy farming?
I enjoy it very much, and there's a wonderful feeling when you come out in this barn late on a March night and you deliver a couple of lambs. I can see one there. There is literally one standing there now that I delivered. I know because she's got a black patch over her left eye, and I remember coming in here late at night and delivering that one. And of course you get a tremendous sense of satisfaction out of that, you know, doing something. Especially when you're in politics, you know, and you're dealing with a lot of intangible things. And in politics, you don't always see the end of what you're doing. You rarely see the end of what you start out to do.
Someday I'm gonna write the story of my life. I'll tell about the night we met and how my heart can forget the way you smiled at me. I'd like the world to know.
Every modern Prime Minister, once they've left office, have written their memoirs. Some of them have taken a long time to decide to do it. Others have done it almost immediately. It can be a very good source of making quite a lot of money quite quickly. Alistair Campbell, who was Tony Blair's press secretary, said he regarded the diaries that he kept every day in Number 10 as his pension. But the question for the Prime Ministers is actually how candid they're going to be. Are they going to dish the dirt? And are they going to admit to doubts they might privately have had while they were Prime Minister?
In 1946, my grandfather was already 71 years old. He didn't know how much longer he would live. He'd already had a stroke and a couple of heart attacks. And he was, if nothing else, he was a dynast, and he wanted to leave something to his heirs.
The wartime leader was a prolific writer, and he saw the opportunity to restore his personal finances by writing a lengthy history of the Second World War and his own key role in it. At his desk in Chartwell, he completed 6 volumes of war memoirs, which he sold for record sums of money.
Winston Churchill was not only justifying his career thus far, he was rewriting history. I mean, the genuine story was magnificent enough, but this was revenge on his enemies, the change of events and all the rest of it on a grand scale. For a long time, historians of the whole epoch through which Churchill lived took the Churchill account of events, both political, military, and everything else, as gospel. I think people have realized that he took a few liberties with the truth just to make the record neater and altogether more glorious when he produced his account of events.
He would be less than human if he didn't do that. And he once said, history will justify me, for I intend to write it.
The bookish Macmillan also planned to write his own version of history. It helped that he'd gone from Number 10 back to head the family firm of Macmillan the Publishers, although he was coy when asked about his plans.
I want to do other things.
What other things?
Well, I got to pay some attention to my family affairs, and I was hoping possibly to write a little.
Your own memoirs, perhaps?
Not necessarily, but
no difficulty in finding a publisher?
Oh, well, I don't know. They're very difficult people, publishers, from the author's point of view.
In fact, Macmillan planned to write 3 volumes of memoirs, as his grandson recalls.
As his publisher, I have to say I think it would have been better had he stuck to 3 volumes. But, of course, the later you get, the more material there is, and you, oh, I can't leave that out, oh, I've got to put that in. We did 6 volumes, as it turned out. We'd have certainly been up around the 10 had we not cut some of the material out.
Macmillan gave TV interviews to the BBC to publicise his memoirs and proved a master in the newfangled art of product placement, carefully displaying his book for the cameras. He told me, I regard it as rather wonderful that your organisation should pay me to talk about the book which I have written and which my little company has published.
I authorised 3pence, on which the settlement was reached.
When Harold Wilson produced his memoirs, just a year after he'd become an ex-Prime Minister for the first time, it caused a publishing sensation.
Even at £4.80 a copy, the book's selling fast. 20,000 copies had gone before publication, and this morning at its launching, Mr. Wilson was submerged by lunchtime crowds after his signature. A pop star with a hit record wouldn't have attracted more attention.
Harold Wilson was still leader of the opposition. Questions over his memoirs led to a huge row between Wilson and the BBC.
He sat on a wall, giving the orders, and then in the midst of it all, he had a great fall. Now he's one of yesterday's men.
For an irreverent BBC TV documentary called Yesterday's Men, the presenter David Dimbleby had asked Wilson how much the Sunday Times had paid him for the serialisation rights to his memoirs. Wilson had bitterly objected to Dimbleby's questions.
Mr. Wilson earned 6 figures for the book, but what those figures are remains a closely guarded secret.
The BBC, under great pressure from Wilson, agreed to cut the exchange from the finished programme.
You couldn't set our minds at rest on the vexed question of what the Sunday Times did actually pay for the book.
No, I don't think it's a matter of interest to the BBC or to anybody else. It's a ridiculous question to put. Yes, and I mean it cut off. I don't want to read in the Times diary on myself that I asked for it to be cut out.
Wilson was in fact paid £250,000, but when I talked to him years later, his anger hadn't subsided.
And the BBC in all its history has never put that kind of question to a Conservative or any other leader. There must have been something wrong that night. And naturally, I wasn't going to be a fool guy for that kind of thing.
Yesterday man will be happy until politically they are today.
I'd like the world to know the story of my life. The moment
Ted Heath amassed a huge amount of official documents and papers, which he kept in an old warehouse. But he couldn't bring himself to use them to write his memoirs until 24 years after he'd left office. Apparently he thought that memoirs were for ex-politicians, and he didn't quite see himself as that.
Please buy this. Please buy this.
Margaret Thatcher had wasted no time in producing her version of history.
Producing the memoirs was vital to her. She wanted to get her side of the story out straight away. If you feel you've been unjustly dispossessed of the office of Prime Minister, if you feel your colleagues have turned on you, you're going to get your revenge on them. You're not going to pull any punches. You're going to tell the story as you saw it and as you believed it.
I didn't write my memoirs with the intention of sticking a knife into old opponents, and nor did I, as anyone who reads those memoirs will readily see. If you have a lot of things that's happening, putting them down on paper and drawing a line underneath it is a very cathartic thing to do. Secondly, there were so many misconceptions, so many things that were misreported or misunderstood, that I thought everyone is entitled to their own individual opinion, but I will write down what happened as I saw it.
So what should be your approach to your memoirs? You've served longer than any other post-war Prime Minister apart from Margaret Thatcher, and you've been a similarly divisive figure. But you know best where the bodies are buried. So how much is your story worth? I asked Ed Victor, the New Yorker who's now the London literary agent to the superstars.
I think Tony Blair is worth a lot of money. There's no question about it. We're talking about many millions of pounds.
How many? Can you put a figure on how
5 plus or minus, which is a lot of money, $10 million. It's not bad. And he may well, Michael, have made a deal along the way. I mean, not a deal writing, because he wouldn't do that, but he may have looked Rupert Murdoch in the eye, and Murdoch may have said, I'll pay you X, and we'll do a universal deal with you for a book, a column, a television, series. Murdoch has it in his power to do all this. He's a huge multimedia company, so that may have happened.
What's the possibility of you becoming Tony Blair's agent?
Of me being his agent? I live in hope that the phone will ring one day, because of I think I have him surrounded in a way with Blunkett and Campbell, his close colleagues.
You've been their agent?
I've been their agent, yes.
Yeah.
And I know what I'm doing. And I think Tony Blair, who was a brilliant politician, may not be such a brilliant tactician on my ground. He's now on my ground. And he could end up being beset by doubt. I also think the issue of speed is important for him. Speed, he should sell his memoirs immediately. And Ronald Reagan did the deal the day after he left office. And that was very smart. Thatcher waited a little bit, and I think she got less money as a result of it.
So aside from your memoirs, what other media opportunities are there? You wanted to be an actor at school, and you've been the most theatrical of Prime Ministers.
I get him to play Terminator 4. I mean, anything is available.
Now that is definitely the best offer I've had. Actually, the sad thing is it's the only offer I've had.
You'll always be in demand as a surprise guest on TV shows, although Harold Wilson's colleagues had doubts about him appearing with Morecambe and Wise.
Friday night, Saturday morning at last.
You might even try your hand at hosting a chat show of your own.
Good evening. I've got 3 guests tonight. Now the man with probably the most revered name in the world, Winston Churchill. Winston, I don't know if you've heard that. Well, is that an advantage or a disadvantage to have your grandfather's name?
Well, I suppose it gets one invited on the Harold Wilson chat show.
That's not why I invited you, as you will find out before.
I recall there was a lot of friendly banter, and he actually was quite good at it. I regretted he didn't sort of carry on a bit longer, or that the program producers knocked it on the head.
Even if your chat show only lasts for 3 episodes, there's big money to be made if you agree to appear in a TV commercial.
You can get Cheshire cheese in 3 colours. Personally, I prefer the blue. He said, you've got to get into 10 seconds. I said, I've got a damn sight more into 10 seconds than that when I've wanted to.
If you don't fancy doing cheesy commercials, the place to go where you can make really big money is America. If you're popular there, there's a fortune to be made on the US lecture circuit. You can follow in the footsteps of your own wife and those of another Prime Minister whose passionate pro-American stance and special relationship with the President won great admiration.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's now my honor and privilege to introduce to you one of the greatest ladies and leaders of our time, Lady Margaret Thatcher.
She would earn huge sums for herself and for the institution she'd set up to promote Thatcherism worldwide.
Ideals are not enough to secure peace and freedom. Only military superiority and the will to use it.
To have actually been so close to her, I feel will always be with me the rest of my life, the way I was touched this evening.
As an American, to see her and to meet her, and she's inspiring. She touched me, she really did.
We do a number of occasions like this where I speak or answer questions, and then we do a signing of various books afterwards.
This lecture circuit, particularly in America, has now become hugely lucrative, for none more than Bill Clinton. But all our ex-prime ministers can make a fortune. Margaret went on the lecture circuit. John's been doing very well on it.
I'm sure Tony Blair will follow the same path. It is extremely lucrative. It also has another purpose. Margaret Thatcher was very widely admired in the United States. And when you've been used to public adulation, and it suddenly disappears when you stop being Prime Minister, at least appearing before wildly enthusiastic audiences of hundreds of Americans in Tuscaloosa or somewhere, still has a nice role in your life. It makes you think you are still admired and wanted. And psychologically, I think it's a great compensation for the loss of office.
Here is Margaret Thatcher.
Thank you for that wonderful reception. Far better than I ever got in the House of Commons.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland.
To acknowledge your enthusiastic reception, you can use your own or shucks version of Lady Thatcher's opening line.
I'm deeply touched by that warm and generous welcome. That's more than I deserve and more than I'm used to, quite frankly.
The rapture that once greeted you may be waning, but there are still big bucks waiting for you in America.
One of the things he can do is lecture. And it's amazing how much money you can make.
What kind of thing are we talking about?
I think in America he would make at a minimum of $150,000, 75,000 pounds per lecture.
Per lecture.
Per lecture, all expenses paid, flown there first class, put up in a nice suite. He has to give something to a lecture agent, but it would be minimal because any lecture agent would be thrilled to have him on their books. And at that kind of, the usual rate for a lecturer, a good one would be $25,000 to $50,000. But I think he could get 3 times that.
And how often Could he get that, do you think?
Oh, how busy will he be? If he does 10 a year, he's making a lot of money, isn't he? You know, once every month. You know, it's huge, huge money.
The lecture circuit can be a lucrative thing for ex-prime ministers.
It can.
It has been for you?
It can be lucrative, and I thoroughly enjoyed it.
You may also want to go into business. So what are your prospects? What kind of companies might you work for, and how much can you earn? There are many do's and don'ts to learn from the experiences of your predecessors. Take Ted Heath. Soon after losing power, the Tory ex-prime minister went to Red China. He met the legendary Chairman Mao, whose country had been for so long off limits, and Heath saw business opportunities there.
Ted significantly had been involved in the opening up of contacts with China, and he had strong contacts with China when it was first beginning to have contacts with the outside world. He maintained a very strong interest in China. He went there frequently, strong connections with China, and I think he did give commercial advice on China.
I went to the stunning house in Salisbury that Heath bought, partly out of his earnings from advising companies that wanted to do business with communist China. It's the first house he ever owned, and he was immensely proud of it. When he died 2 years ago, he left over £5 million in his will, along with plans for the house to be open to the public. Among his prized photos are one that shows him with Richard Nixon, the first American president to foster friendly relations with China. And there's another showing Heath with the veteran Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping, whom he would often visit over the years. Heath kept the sources of his income deliberately opaque, like a complex Chinese puzzle. His earnings were paid to the obscurely named Dumpton Gap Company that didn't make its accounts public. The former Labour Prime Minister Jim Callaghan was rather less successful with his business ventures. He agreed to become a paid advisor to the fast-growing International Bank of Credit and Commerce, BCCI, that was run from London and Abu Dhabi. But when suspicions grew about the activities of the bank's directors, Callaghan claimed that from his knowledge of them, they were men of the utmost integrity. But it wasn't so, and BCCI was to be proved guilty of massive fraud. And after arrests of its staff in America for laundering of money from arms and drugs deals, the bank collapsed.
That did become controversial, yes. I think he managed to disentangle himself before it became a scandal.
But do you think it was a cautionary tale for
I think it may have been. Well, I don't know whether it was a cautionary tale for Prime Minister. I think it was a cautionary tale for him.
Margaret Thatcher was, for a time, a paid advisor to the giant Philip Morris Tobacco Company.
Come on, guys, behind the line.
It reportedly paid her $1 million a year, and she celebrated her 70th birthday in America. But many people wondered about an ex-prime minister joining the tobacco lobby. How careful do you think a prime minister, an ex-prime minister, needs to be?
I think you have to be very careful. I think you have to be very careful, because it is not only that you need to make sure you're doing something that is actually appropriate to the job that you once held. I think that is important. But also you need to be sure you don't put yourself in a position where malicious tongues can suggest things that are not true.
You will now see the future of the internal combustion.
John Major became a director of the Mayflower Company, which developed an environmentally friendly vehicle engine.
I waited to see what offers would come, and quite a few offers came. Some of them were very attractive, some of them were frankly inappropriate, and I just pushed those immediately to one side.
What kind of things was
I'm not
inappropriate?
going to go into that. Well, I was offered jobs to chair organisations that I wouldn't wish to have had an interest in, and I didn't, and I pushed those to one side. I was very selective. I knew there were some things I would never do. I would never lobby. I would never use my address book and my past contacts for specific business purposes. I knew I wasn't going to do that.
The register of MP's interests for 2001, the last year that John Major was in the House, lists the companies he worked for. Chief among them is the American private equity company, the Carlyle Group, which likes to employ ex-presidents and prime ministers.
And what about, you did work for the Carlyle Group, which people don't really know very much about, although they know it famous, private equity group and involved in arms deals. Did you think that was appropriate to be working?
I didn't lobby for Carlyle. I advised Carlyle on what was happening in different parts of the world and that sort of thing. So I did no lobbying at all. And they're one of the finest private equity groups in the world and hugely successful.
You may be able to make a good living from business over the years, as John Major has. You'll also have to take another key decision about your own future. What should be your attitude to your successor as Prime Minister? If you've had a fraught and bruising relationship, it may be tempting for you to stay in politics and become a backseat driver and candid critic. Again, the experience of your predecessors is illuminating.
Jim Callaghan.
Jim Callaghan became a very popular figure in the House of Lords and was always careful to refrain from criticising his successors.
He always said to me that he was living by the old seaman's mantra, that you don't speak to the man at the wheel and you don't spit on the deck, i.e., stay out of the day-to-day things and retain what influence you can on policy issues, but don't get involved.
I just wondered what view you took once you stopped being Prime Minister in terms of whether you should interfere or not.
I took the view that I should intervene only occasionally, not on the trivia of party disputes that are here today and gone tomorrow. I can't be bothered to waste my time and effort on those anymore. But if there's something that is strategic and importance, then, as the last 10 years will have shown, I have spoken out and expressed my views on it.
But I suppose I was thinking also of an approach to your successor as party leader, whether you took some quite specific view
Where I can
about...
support them, I have said so. When I cannot, I have shut up.
Are you in the middle?
No.
But Ted Heath and Margaret Thatcher both saw things in a very different way from John Major.
We wanted you to be on my right. No, I didn't mean it politically at all. I assure you it never occurred to me.
That would be difficult.
Everybody's recorded Ted's political and his personal behaviour after he was replaced by Margaret. It was the greatest sulk I've ever known. Several of these prime ministers are quite remarkable and unusual personalities. Ted was unusual in that he maintained this fantastic silence, aloofness, and sulk was the best way of describing it. For years and years and years, he disapproved of what his successor was doing. He made that perfectly clear. He was not on speaking terms with quite remarkable people because he could not forgive them for working with that woman, as he always described her.
I heard that when Mrs. Thatcher fell from power, you rang your office and said, "Rejoice, rejoice."
I said it 3 times, I think. Rejoice, rejoice, rejoice.
Deeply wounded by the way she had been forced out, Margaret Thatcher soon made life very difficult for her successor, John Major.
She's an absolutely classic Margaret Thatcher thing. She went to war. She decided she'd been betrayed. And it wasn't very long before she was spending her time trying to get her revenge on people, including her successor.
John Major was very hurt, really, that Margaret Thatcher, who had, after all, chosen him as her successor, let it be known from time to time that she disapproved of the things that he was doing. And because that wasn't done in public, but by word of mouth which spread, it was actually very difficult for him to deal with.
What did you feel about the role that your own predecessor, Margaret Thatcher, played in this?
That's all ancient history. I'm talking about what happened after I left Parliament. I'm not going to crawl over all those old battles again, Michael.
No, I suppose the reason I'm asking is in terms of, you were saying that you kind of took this self-denying ordinance as an ex-Prime Minister not to intervene in politics, whereas Margaret Thatcher approached it in a rather different way.
Everyone operates in their own particular way, according to their own particular dictates, and I think we'll leave it at that.
Harold Macmillan said that once you leave the stage as Prime Minister, you shouldn't hang around the green room.
When I was a child, it was the ambition of almost every boy to drive a railway engine. I've never achieved it. To have one named after me is a very high honor.
But even that high honor was not enough for the old statesman. He broke his pledge about not intervening in politics by giving a TV interview as the country seemed to be sliding into chaos. In his interview, Macmillan called for a government of national unity.
Just supposing, Mr. Macmillan, that someone were to ask you to form such a government, do you think that this could be easily done, to form the right combination of men to produce the right common policies?
Well, you're tempting me, you know. Mr. Gladstone formed his last government when he was 83, and I'm only 82. You mustn't put temptation in my way. But, of course, it wouldn't be easy. Nothing's easy. But I say, what is the alternative?
He raised the question of a government of national unity, or national government of some kind of coalition. And suddenly it became clear that, you know, off somewhere, someone had sounded a trumpet which only he could hear, and the old war horse was reacting to it. And he genuinely thought, oh, maybe, you know.
So assuming you're highly unlikely to get your old job back, how easy will it be to find happiness as an ex-Prime Minister? On the evidence of your predecessors, it will largely depend on whether you have a hinterland of fulfilling personal interests outside politics. We know you're still a keen electric guitarist. We also know you love exotic holidays. And there'll doubtless be a continuing array of rich friends with fine villas where you'll be able to stay. Just as there had been for Winston Churchill when he left office for the last time in 1955, at the age of 80.
His two favorite watering holes were Marrakesh in the winter and Monte Carlo. He was 80, but he had his hobby of painting. He really loved that. He really liked bright light and bright colors.
Would he also go on Aristotle Onassis' yacht?
The Christina, yes. He loved that.
So do you think he enjoyed his last years after he'd stopped being Prime Minister?
Oh, yes. Until the last 18 months of his life, he was still in good form, good spirits.
Harold Wilson's years as an ex-Prime Minister were less fulfilled.
Wilson's problem was his life had been entirely politics, and he didn't have a personal hinterland of other interests that you can fall back on when the big job is taken away, and he didn't have anything to replace it. And it became sadder later when his mind went.
The bachelor Ted Heath had his music and his sailing. They may have provided some consolation for the hurt he felt at losing the premiership. But when I would visit his house in Salisbury to interview him, he struck me as a profoundly lonely man. And one of his staff told me he would go most nights to a local pub and drink for an hour with only a police driver and special branch detective as company.
Well, Ted was not a happy man. Ted, I think, had bouts of happiness and bouts of regret and unhappiness. I think he was, his retirement was a complicated affair, but not, at least not in the end, a miserable one.
Ice cream for those who smile after lunch.
My father was definitely happy and definitely content. Tony and Cherie Blair very kindly gave a very nice 90th birthday reception for him at number 10. And he was quite moved and quite apparently frail on that occasion, although he wasn't always. And he gave a very moving speech, really. It's one I know that Tony Blair himself remembers and quotes sometimes about what it meant to be Prime Minister, but more importantly, what it meant As he said, when all this huge responsibility and high office is finished, what really matters? And he said, well, what's really mattered to me is my family.
At the Oval, which was John Major's first stop as an ex-Prime Minister, he launched his new book on cricket last month. He'd been kept happy writing it between business engagements for the past 3 years.
Over the last few days, I've noticed there's been a great deal of talk about what former Prime Ministers do once they've left office. Actually, and I'm sure Tony would agree with this, I think there may have been a touch too much talk about what Prime Ministers do. I'm not sure that Tony will write a book on cricket. Reasonably sure he won't, but I can't be absolutely certain. But I can certainly recommend writing as a cathartic return to the real world.
I mean, do you think that in terms of what you do after you have been Prime Minister, having some kind of hinterland like cricket is important?
Well, I certainly think it's very desirable. I mean, there are some Prime Ministers who spend the rest of their life looking back and wondering always about politics. There are others who move on. It's a matter of personal choice. But the important thing, as far as you can, is to look forward to the things that you propose to do in future. I was always determined not to have my life solely bounded by the constraints of politics.
Margaret Thatcher had no other real interests other than politics. I think this makes it infinitely hard. I mean, John Major had his cricket. Harold Macmillan had his trollop book. And other people had other interests and whatever. Margaret Thatcher was a highly political animal whose whole fibre and being was concentrated in the world of politics. Makes it much more difficult, I think.
I just wonder whether you think you ever find happiness as an ex-Prime Minister.
I don't know whether you can be happy after being Prime Minister, but I can tell you that I don't believe Margaret Thatcher has had a happy day in her life since she ceased being Prime Minister.
If you're in politics, you expect to be knifed in the back. What I will never forgive is it wasn't by Parliament that I was thrown out. I shall never forget that, and I shall never forgive.
So how will Tony Blair cope with life as an ex-Prime Minister after what John Major describes as the longest farewell tour since Dame Nellie Melba? One of Blair's closest advisors inside Number 10 told me Tony still has no idea what's going to hit him.
The thing he'll miss most of all is being cut off from top-grade information. He'll no longer receive secret intelligence reports and papers and briefings, which tell him what's really going on in Britain and the outside world.
People ask you questions, and you're about to answer, and you think to yourself, hang on, I'm about to express an opinion on this. I haven't seen the papers. I don't know what it is that the Prime Minister knows that I no longer know. So here am I about to say, well, I think he should have handled this differently. But he may know something that I once would have known that nobody else knows. So when people ask you those sort of questions, you are more cautious than you would otherwise be, because you're conscious that the information flow that once automatically came to you, that you absorbed as a matter of course, is no longer there.
After a 15-minute meeting at Number 10, off Mr. Blair sped to Sedgefield.
Today I announce my decision to stand down from the leadership of the Labour Party.
What Tony Blair calls the feral beasts of the 24-hour media will no longer have him to feed on. Those closest to him say the role Blair wants to take on immediately is that of a roving world peacemaker.
I suspect there's all sorts of things that he'll do in the future. And you've got, you know, it's interesting that because, I mean, he's 53, leaving
54
office, now. 54 is it? Yeah. Leaving office, I mean, you know, Gladstone, Churchill, these guys, they're getting into their 80s. And when they kind of left real top-flight political life. And you look at somebody like Bill Clinton, Al Gore, you see what they've achieved since leaving office. And I think Tony's probably thinking, you know, I'll be able to do some of that and I'll still be involved. He's never going to want for profile if he wants it. He's never going to want for opportunities. He's never going to want for opportunities to make a difference. And I think he will still want to do that. I think that is kind of ingrained in him.
To make a difference in what kind of thing would he want to make a difference?
I think he'll probably, I certainly don't think he'll be hanging around, you know, sort of backseat driving on Gordon. I don't think he'll do any of that. So I think actually a lot of it will focus on some of the big international stuff.
I mean, he's going to want what somebody in business would want if he ceased to be the chairman and CEO, which is the last big job, the next big job in the career. In Tony's case, I think it'll be trying to govern the world and advise all the other political leaders how to run things. And now you find that difficult because there is a sudden... You are very ex as an ex-Prime Minister.
It may take you a very long time to adjust fully to no longer being the most powerful person in the land. For the one thing all members of the ex-Prime Minister's Club have in common is that they've lost the most exciting job they'll ever have.
When you chief whip was in the 50s?
Yes, 50.
Not during Suez, was it?
Yes,
no.
Yes.
You were actually chief whip during the Suez crisis?
I handled the whole of Suez.
I think almost all of them. If you said that by some amazing miracle you could go back tomorrow and you could be Prime Minister again and take on all that hassle and all that strain, all that criticism, all those crises, they'd all have jumped at it and gone straight back straight away.
Goodbye, goodbye, we're leaving you, Skeletor. Goodbye.
Right-wing and working class Jeff Norcott takes aim tomorrow night. How the middle class ruined Britain, over on BBC 2 at 9. Download BBC Sounds for Brexit Cast. Laura Koonsberg, Katya Adler, Adam Fleming and Chris Mason with the gossip from Westminster and Brussels.